My great-grandmother, Louisa Katrina Charlotta Overman Barker, was born in Germany and came to the United States as a child. She lived on a farm in Rush City, Minnesota, until she traveled to Montana as a young woman. There, she met my great-grandfather, Joseph Barker, and the couple lived in a small Victorian house in Great Falls, Montana, where my grandmother, Ethel Barker, was born. Joseph's family was originally from England and came to the United States in the 1600s. They had to flee to Canada after the American Revolution because they were loyal to the British. Joseph immigrated from Canada to the U.S. to settle in Montana in 1884. My grandmother, Ethel, was Louisa and Joseph's youngest child. She lived in the house where she was born her entire life, first with her sisters and later when she raised her own family. Ethel married Bill Haney, my grandfather, in 1930. Bill was a large and gregarious man. His family immigrated from Ireland and England to Ontario, Canada, and then came to the United States in 1896, first in North Dakota, and then moving to Great Falls, Montana, in 1903. Bill's mother, Jane Haney, loved to read and prized education. Some of my favorite childhood books are from her, including Anne of Green Gables and The Secret Garden. She and my great-grandfather, Samuel Haney, had a family of 5 boys. My grandfather, Bill, was the middle child. Bill and Ethel were a happy couple, very much in love. He worked at the local newspaper and was also a magician and entertainer. My grandmother worked at Cran's House of Flowers. They had 2 children, my Uncle Bill and my mother, Carol. My mother was born in 1937 and lived with her parents and brother in a small house behind her grandmother's until she was 8, when her family moved to the big house and she shared a bedroom with her grandmother. I see joy when I look at old photos and movies of my mother's family. My grandparents were kind and gentle. The children were loved and supported. They had strong connections to their community, with neighbors and extended family, sharing in events and celebrations. Many of the traditions that I grew up with are from my mother's family: Christmas celebrations, Easter celebrations, Valentine's Day celebrations, celebrating any time, summer picnics, playing house, dressing up, singing, making art. My mother married my father, Gerald Collins, in the summer of 1955. My father came from a farming family north of Great Falls. His mother's family, the Deerdorfs, had farmed for generations. They originally came to the United States from Germany in the early 1700s to escape religious persecution. A group of 6 Deerdorf families, including my ancestors, left the banks of the Mississippi River in 1853 and traveled in wagons drawn by oxen for 5 months. They landed in Portland, Oregon, before scattering along the west coast. Robert and Eliza Deerdorf, my great-grandparents, moved to Montana in 1912, where they took up a homestead north of Great Falls. My grandfather, Tal Collins, married Maudie Deerdorf in 1925. Although the origin of the Collins side of the family is a mystery, we know that my great-grandfather, William Collins, married Gertha Tivabaugh in 1897. We know he graduated from Rush Medical College in Chicago in 1904, and we know he had 7 brothers, but we know nothing of them or where his family came from or where they went. As for William Collins, he gave up his medical practice in Illinois to take up farming and moved to Montana in 1911. He'd read articles in the newspaper telling about the free homestead land in Montana, and he thought it would be a good place to live, even though he had no experience farming or even growing his own garden. My grandfather was 13 years old when they homesteaded. His father came out ahead of the rest of the family in a boxcar, which carried all of the family's provisions and livestock, including horses, 2 milk cows, 4 crates of chickens, groceries, and the family dog. The rest of the family arrived later by train. They lived in a tent all summer and fall while they built our house. The following spring, they broke ground. It was my grandfather who turned out to be the farmer in the family. He was a natural with farm work, horses, and machinery. And my great-grandfather became a country doctor and delivered many babies. My grandfather expected to inherit the family farm one day, but after his father died, his mother unexpectedly sold it to a neighbor. And so my grandfather became a mechanic in town where he worked for many years. He was later able to return to farming in the 1940s when he took over the farm of his father-in-law, George Deerdorf. This turns out to be the old farm that I knew as a child, where my dad grew up, where we visited for Sunday dinners, and played on farm machinery. This farm is located 45 miles north of Great Falls, Montana. It's a small farm by Montana standards, just over 300 acres devoted to wheat production. The land is flat in this area, with long, straight roads, field after field of golden wheat, blue skies, blazing sun, hot in the summer, cold in the winter. The earth is dry, hard-baked. My grandfather hauled water for household use, and he practiced dry land farming. My dad was born in Great Falls, Montana, and lived in town until his parents moved to the farm when he was 13. He and his brother helped with farming, grew into teenagers, collected cars, and got into a bit of trouble until my dad met my mom. There is a story in my family that my great-grandmother Haney offered to pay $1,000 for my mother to go to college instead of marrying my father. This is the same great-grandmother who prized education, and so it can be assumed that she was really more interested in my mother receiving a college education than she was in preventing my mother from marrying my father. Either way, the gift was declined, and she was married at age 17, a month after graduating from high school. My parents lived on the farm when they were first married in 1955. They fixed up the one-room bunkhouse with small areas for a kitchen, buffet, living room, and bedroom. They hoped to live there to help my grandfather farm. The farm wasn't big enough, however, to support the new family, and they moved to town, where my father took on an apprenticeship to become an electrician and start a family. I was born in 1958 and grew up in Great Falls, Montana, with my 3 sisters and mother and father. I lived 4 miles from town in a rural area called Irish Acres in Donovan Park. It was behind a large dairy and was walking distance to the Missouri River. This was a time when kids roamed without adult supervision, and we lived and played outside most of the summer. We had picnics and forts and secret clubs. We usually made our own entertainment, neighborhood parades, and play weddings. I had a play wedding with Jake Miller when I was 8 years old. We invited many of our neighbors, and my friend Karen played the priest. We had frosted graham crackers in place of a wedding cake, but our dog Penny ate them before we could serve our guests. I was lucky enough to grow up with a large circle of family and friends. During the summer, we went on picnics and camped in the mountains, ran through sprinklers and swam at Mitchell Pool. During the winter, we went sledding, ice skating, and entertained ourselves with arts, crafts, books, music, and dance. I was part of a 4-H club called the Stitch and Stewers. Most of the kids who lived out south of town were part of the club, and their parents were volunteer leaders. I had lots of fun baking, and I entered cookies, cakes, quick breads, and pie annually in the state fair. My mom taught home decoration and childcare, and unofficially she taught singing. I have great memories of singing folk songs along with my sister's 4-H group in the basement of our home. Songs like Lemon Tree, How Many Roads Must a Man Walk Down, Puff the Magic Dragon. I had a good childhood. Our family was solidly working class, as were most of the other families we knew. We didn't have a lot, but we had enough. We were provided for, supported, and loved. I should have grown up with a sense of belonging and of place, but for some reason I didn't. I grew up feeling like a fish out of water, and I couldn't wait to leave home. I left home early at age 14 and married Jerry Joe Ronquillo, who was 21. Jerry was charismatic and charming. He played the guitar and joined in our family celebrations. He came from Billings, Montana, where his adoptive parents, Annie and Sinido, had raised him, and where we moved to start our family. At age 18, I had Nathan, the joy of my life. Nathan and I were on our own after that. The marriage with Jerry ended after 5 years. The most difficult thing was leaving his parents, who I loved dearly. My parents took us in, and we lived with them for a few years in Great Falls before I headed out on my own again. Before Nathan started kindergarten, I decided we needed to go on an adventure. So we went first to a ranch in Montana where I cooked for the harvest crew, and then stayed for almost a year and helped take care of a little girl named Jessie. We later traveled to California, where I cooked for a summer theosophical camp in the Sierra Nevada mountains, where Nathan turned 6 years old, climbed trees, played in streams, learned how to ride a bike, and hiked up Mount Baldy. Our adventure lasted almost 1.5 years. On our way home from California, everything we had was in our old blue station wagon. We stopped to visit my sister Nona in Seattle, and we never left. Even though I hadn't attended high school, I was able to attend college with help from the Equal Opportunity Program at the University of Washington, where I received a bachelor's degree in international studies and master's in public administration. This was both a happy time and a sad time for me. I lost my sister Nona to leukemia in 1988, shortly after I received my bachelor's degree. One of the hardest losses of my life. I also met my husband, Mike. He missed meeting Nona by 1 month, and I know she would have loved him. We married in 1991. And then more babies came. With my sister Jeannie and her family and close friends in Seattle, we developed a large extended family here, and we kept close connections to my family in Montana. And over time, Nathan grew up, somewhat more painfully than most, but that's his story. And he had kids of his own. So now I'm a grandparent, and the circle continues. I am grateful and lucky to have access to my family history, to the connections that made me who I am. I wonder what I will leave my own grandchildren, what strengths, what weaknesses, what ways of thinking that helps shape their future. I hope for them that they have the courage and resilience of all their ancestors, the ones we know of and the ones whose history has not been written. In the meantime, I savor every minute I have with them and wait with bated breath to see who they'll become.